Do you feel poor? And I don't mean destitute on the side of the street. You enjoy your small luxuries, but you are just one medical crisis away from being totally broke. You know, we may live in an era of abundance, but the things that were accessible to our parents, say a home, feel totally out of reach. Your debt is high, rent is even higher, and the crypto bros and Instagram models online seem to be doing much better than you. You, the person who went to school like they told you to, tried to get a good job right out of college and really struggled. Maybe you make a good salary, but it seems to flow right through your bank account. You are definitely not alone, my friend. Today, we're talking about why Gen Z feels so poor, and older generations may relate too, because the forces we are investigating began before any of us were born. None of you were born in 1913, right? These forces are not exactly capitalism, the stars, or any particular president. It's a cartel. This is the story of how money became an illusion right under our noses, how we ended up broke and in debt, and why knowing your enemy is the first step to defeating it. Let's talk about money. Before we had currency, we did a little thing called bartering. But there were obvious problems. Like, what, are you going to buy that shirt off TikTok shop with 7 chickens? Do they even accept that? You want to get paid for your corporate 9 to 5 with heirloom tomatoes? I don't think so. So people began using different commodities like grains or iron to buy things more easily. But gold emerged as the rightful king. You know, they say diamonds are a girl's best friend, but to be honest with you, I prefer gold. Gold doesn't get old and die. You can chop it in half and its parts are still worth the whole. You can travel with it on your way to pick up your wares and knickknacks, and you can't easily add to the supply unless you're willing to mine for it. Anyways, so how did we move from this luxurious, wonderful substance to this trash? To make a very long story short, people needed a place to store their gold. Goldsmith said, sure, here is my very large, very secure vault. I protect your money with my life. I become banker. Banks created slips of paper that were as good as gold because you could bring the paper to the banker and receive your stash. And so people traded with those slips of paper. But then some bankers decided to start a practice called fractional reserve banking. I know your eyes just glazed over, but I promise to make it interesting. Under fractional reserve banking, the money you deposit into a bank is not held for you in a vault like in Harry Potter. The number on your account is an IOU. Let's say someone goes to the bank for a loan to buy a house. The bank creates more IOUs based on the same money that you just deposited and gives that to the borrower. Now we're both out there spending IOUs based on the same stash. This is how banks create money. And if you're thinking, well, gee, Maggie, that sounds like a house of cards right there, then you're a smart cookie. Bad banks who risk too much of their deposits on loans get swamped by angry depositors once we find out they don't have the money. Back in the day, this would send banks out of business. We had whole panics. You know, when I panic, it's just another Tuesday. But back then, it meant something really bad. Around the turn of the century, new smaller banks began popping up and taking clientele and money from the big federal banks for this reason. So the representatives of these big banks, who usually competed with each other, thought this was a grave injustice to their bottom line and did something shocking. In 1910, they got together in secret on Jekyll Island and hatched a plan. One that would favor them over the small competitors, stop the bank runs, and enable them to lend out nearly infinite amounts of money and collect interest on it. They'd convince Congress to create a central bank, calling it the Federal Reserve. This would be a privately owned bank, but the president would appoint the leader, and the reserve would have exclusive rights to print money. The central bank would work with big banks as the lender of last resort. A cartel had been created. Since Congress created the Federal Reserve in 1913, it has played a key role in every boom and bust of the business cycle while enabling the United States federal government to fund endless wars without even needing to raise taxes on us. And here's how they do it. The Federal Reserve prints money, not by literally running their money printers, although they do that too, but by giving banks more money to lend with. They often buy government debt from the banks by crediting money to those banks that did not exist before. This is how they create it out of thin air. The banks then lend that money, which then gets deposited into other banks, which then uses those deposits to create more loans. Those loans get deposited into more banks, and this leads to the money multiplier effect. I wonder what that would look like visually. This is fractional reserve banking on steroids. When the banks make too risky of an investment, especially on a big company that employs lots of Americans or important foreign trading partners, they can go to Congress and plead with our politicians to pretty please bail out their bad loans so that we can save jobs. This is how the burden of bailouts falls on the taxpayer. But it doesn't stop there. This influx of money from the Federal Reserve creates a huge boom in the business cycle, but it does so by inflating the dollar. And to clear something up, businesses raising prices, that isn't inflation. That's a response to inflation. As Henry Hazlitt put it, the causes of inflation are not, as so often said, multiple and complex, but simply the result of printing too much money. You tell him, Henry. So why is inflation even bad? I know it sounds like a dumb question, but let's really consider the impacts of inflating the money supply, as explained by Murray Rothbard decades ago. First, the people who benefit are the ones receiving the initial money, usually the government, the banks, and the people receiving the big loans. But then prices go up because more money is competing for the same amount of resources. Your money that you worked hard for is suddenly worth less. This is a transfer of wealth from all of us to a teeny tiny group of people. Inflation is a tax on the non-preferred citizen, if you will. And businesses end up taking the brunt of abuse and scapegoating for rising prices. We start buying lower quality items because it's easier to stomach that than rising prices. See the rise of Temu and drop shipping sites? We start eating worse food. We begin indulging in small luxuries because we can't afford the big ones. Hello, Stanley Cup craze. And people start looking to get rich quick. I'm looking at you, OnlyFans, meme coins, and sketchy Instagram hustler gigs. Your paycheck is not going as far as it used to, so it's harder to save. And you put off buying that house out of hope that the prices will eventually come down. So then we begin asking the government to step in and help us out. Can you raise wages? Can you forgive my student loans? Can you stop inflation, please? And then the Federal Reserve goes into a secret meeting that you're not allowed to listen in on, and they come out, declare a higher interest rate, and the economy begins to cool. But these cooling periods are really hard on people too. The Federal Reserve is supposed to keep inflation low and stable and employment high. This low inflation has degraded our dollar tremendously over time. We've also seen 19 recessions in the time since the Fed was established, including the Great Depression and the Great Recession. Great job, guys. And since we came off the gold standard in 1971, the money printers have really been going burr because they no longer have to redeem our dollars in gold. If you look at charts of our government's debt and the consumer price index, you can clearly see the moment we went off the gold standard. Now, you may be wondering, if our money isn't based on gold, what is it based on? Debt. Is it any wonder why my generation, having lived under a degrading dollar, feels the economy is not working for them? But the solution is not to print more money or spend our way into prosperity. The only solution on a macro level is to audit and then end the Federal Reserve. I have left so many resources, books, videos, documentaries, articles for you to deep dive further into this subject. And I'm hoping to make this a Why You Feel Poor series, exploring things like student loans and housing costs more in depth. Let me know if you'd like that in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.